If you had to paint the gutter, which color would you choose? Said the patron to the painter said the blues. Do you act off intuition or languish and peruse? More like tap into tradition from the angle of my mood.
Hey there, my name is Craig Bauer and I am a mixing engineer, and I am currently in Denver, Colorado, working out of my Northward acoustics control room here. I'm going to tell you a quick story before we take a look at what I'm going to show you today. After 20 years out of working in Chicago, I had moved to Los Angeles. I had been there maybe a month or two when Dirk from Plug-in Alliance showed up at our studio complex that I was working out of, and we got into a conversation about various plugins, about various software, about hardware, and where the state of the industry was at. One of the things that came up was a legendary dynamics controller that I was absolutely in love with at the time. We had a long discussion about it, and a few weeks ago, Plug-in Alliance had reached out to me and said they had something they wanted to show me. Well, that something that they showed me was the AMEK Mastering Compressor, which happens to be a model of the exact compressor that we were talking about 10 years ago, almost to the day. I've tested it out on a number of different sources, and what I'm going to do today is show you some of those things. Okay, so I have two different mixes that I've worked this plugin into with two different artists. The first one being an artist by the name of Colin Peterik. Colin is an incredible songwriter and producer in his own right, but interestingly enough, he has a great lineage where his father was in a band called Survivor back in the 80s and 90s, and just happened to be the guy that wrote the song Eye of the Tiger for the Rockies movies. So we would expect nothing less from Colin. The second track is a mix for Lupe Fiasco, hip-hop artist. His album came out maybe 6 or 8 months ago. I did the entire album, and Lupe I worked with back in the early 2000s for his first two albums. The song Kick Push is probably most familiar to most people. Again, legendary hip-hop artist. So I want to thank both of these people for allowing the use of this track as we go forward. I have Colin's track pulled up. The name of the song is My Secrets. And let's just listen to a bit of the track just to get a feel for what the song is.
I'm never gonna fall again, no. I'm never gonna stall again, no. I'm never gonna hang my head low. I'm never giving up my secrets.
Super catchy, great song. I have the lead vocal pulled up, and we have the AMEK on this lead vocal. You heard what it sounds like in the track, perfectly smooth, not overdone in any kind of way. There's still some automation that's happening behind the scenes here, but if I didn't want to have to do any automation whatsoever, it is possible. My particular style of mixing is, in a situation like this, to use the minimum amount of compression necessary, create some glue to make it cohesive without overdoing it. Of course, in certain situations where we want to do something like a parallel drum bus, where we really want to have a very aggressive, overdriven compression sound, that's perfectly fine. We could show you some examples of that, but let's start with this vocal. And just carefully listen, because it's being done very subtly, for the glue that happens once this guy's in here. I'm using a little bit of the slow detector, as you can see as you watch this meter here, a little bit of the fast detector, so for anything that gets above the slow detector based on where the ratio is, and that provides the right amount of glue. One other thing I want to mention is when using the soft ratio here, it's necessary to use makeup gain with the output control. Whereas if you're using a fixed ratio, there's automatic makeup gain. So because we're using the soft knee, we've got some makeup gain added here. I'm going to solo the vocal with the plug-in bypass real quick, just to see what the difference between bypass sounds and with the plug-in in. So check it out.
I'm never gonna fall again, no. I'm never gonna stall again, no. I'm never gonna hang my head low. I'm never giving up my secrets. I'm never gonna fall again, no. I'm never giving up my halo. I'm never gonna hang my head low. I'm never giving up my secrets.
So once we got halfway through that clip and I added it back in, If you were listening carefully, you could easily hear the added glue and cohesiveness that happens within that vocal. So it does a great job of providing a very transparent but gentle sort of compression on this vocal. It's perfect. Let's check out one other example here. I'm going to go to a synth bass sound and we can see how well it works on that. Let's take a look at how I'm using the plugin here. Fixed ratio 4:1. I'm using the fast detector. I'm also got some of the slow detector in there using a fast ratio, but no release hysteresis is necessary here. And let's take a look at where the threshold is sitting.
I'm never gonna fall again, no. I'm never gonna stall again, no. I'm never gonna hang my head low. I'm never giving up my...
So as you're looking at this graph here, the plugin is barely touching, based on where the threshold is barely doing anything in this particular section. In other sections of the tune, it's probably doing a little bit more than it is here. The other thing to notice about this real quick is that I'm using a sidechain filter down at about 120. The point of that is there's a lot of low-end information happening on that synth bass sound. So by using the sidechain, it's allowing the plugin to do what it needs to do without overreacting to the low-end information on this synth bass sound. Let's take a look what it sounds like with the plugin bypassed, and I'll add it back in. Now let's check it out with it re-engaged. So even though it's doing very little as far as gain reduction is concerned, it's still adding a cohesiveness. It's still evening out the bass sound altogether. And it's working really, really well, especially because the sidechain filter is not making the plugin overreact. But one thing I want to do as we listen to this, I'm going to adjust some of these settings as it's playing back and kind of overdrive it so you can see how it reacts to really some aggressive settings. So interestingly enough, even when you really drive it very hard, it's still unbelievably transparent, which is a good thing. So you can do a whole lot with this plugin, drive it very hard, still have it be very transparent, and still have it be very useful. The only thing I would recommend is making sure that you don't overdo it to the point where you completely suck out all of the dynamics in the track and make it so static that it becomes uninteresting. I have the mix bus pulled up. I am using this compressor on the mix bus. Again, I'm using it fairly subtly, just providing a little bit of glue to the mix without overdoing it and not sending it into a massive amount of compression. I want to have it do the minimal amount just to provide this glue, provide a little bit of girth to the mix without making it pump in any kind of way. So let's listen to the mix with this in, and again, keep an eye on the detectors and the screen here just so you can see what's happening.
I'm never giving up my secrets.
If you're watching the display here, you notice that I'm only using the slow detector as indicated by the green. It's providing that glue without doing any peak limiting, without engaging the fast limiter or fast compression. I'm using soft mode and using a little bit of makeup gain as necessary. On the mix, I also have a tiny bit of stereo width added, but let's go back and play the mix one more time with the plugin bypassed, and I'll add it back in partway through. So even though it's doing a very minor amount of compression, once it's engaged, glues the mix together, provides that necessary thing. Not sure what the right word is other than glue. That's the perfect description. It doesn't sound over compressed. It doesn't sound over limited. It would still go to mastering with me leaving this on the mix bus. I would not remove it to send it to mastering. And it's just the perfect amount. It provides exactly what the mix needs to make it feel finished. So with that, let's jump over to Lupe's mix, a song called Miss Mural from his most recent album, and look at a couple instances there. Just like we did with Colin's track, there's kind of a different approach I'm taking on this mix bus, simply because with this hip-hop track, it needs to be slightly more aggressive, and I want it to punch a little bit more. So I've created this preset that is doing exactly that. The timing for the slow detector is in the medium range, a hair more to the slow side than the faster side. Fixed ratio of about 2:1, so it's not overly done, but let's check out the entire mix with it in.
If you had to paint the gutter, which color would you choose? Said the patron to the painter. The painter said the blues. Do you act off intuition or languish and peruse more?
So as we check it out again, notice the hysteresis control here and how fast it's letting the compressor recover in order to catch the next thing. That's making the compressor work a little bit harder. Pumping is probably a little bit too strong of a word here for this, but it's aggressive, and as it should be for a track like this. One more time.
If you had to paint the gutter, which color would you choose? Said the patron to the painter. The painter said the blues. Do you act off intuition or languish?
So one time with it bypassed, and then I'll bring it back in.
If you had to paint the gutter, which color would you choose? Said the patron to the painter. The painter said the blues. Do you act off intuition or languish and peruse? More like tap into tradition from the angle of my mood. He looked back at his canvas or strangled.
So as you can see, once it's back in, it just gets more aggressive. You can feel the drum loop pumping just a hair. Feels great for this kind of track. Let's back off the settings real quick and just see how that feels.
If you had to paint the gutter, which color would you choose? Said the patron to the painter. The painter said the blues. Do you act off intuition or languish and peruse? More like tap into tradition from the angle of my mood. He looked back at his canvas or
So when I back up all these settings, the mix gets very smooth and, to me, slightly lethargic. It doesn't quite feel right. So I like it punchy in that way that we had it. Potentially raising the threshold a hair more, but it just feels great.
If you had to paint the gutter, which color would you choose? Said the patron to the painter. The painter said the blues. Do you act off?
All right, we've got the lead vocal pulled up here, and we can just talk about the settings that I have for this at the moment. First of all, I want to point out that I have a stereo instance of the plugin pulled up, which seems slightly odd given that it's a lead vocal. However, this lead vocal has a tiny bit of processing on it. That's the way it was sent to me for the mix, so hence using a stereo instance of the plugin. Again, the idea here is to keep it a little bit more aggressive for this hip-hop track. So I'm using the fast detector. The timing on the slow is backed off a bit. We have a little bit of hysteresis pulled in here just so that it recovers quicker and makes that vocal feel slightly more aggressive. So I'm going to leave it bypassed for the moment and solo the vocals so you can hear what it sounds like without the compression.
If you had to paint the gutter, which color would you choose? Said the patron to the painter. The painter said the blues. Do you?
Now let's pop it back in.
If you had to paint the gutter, which color would you choose? Said the patron to the painter. The painter said the blues. Do you?
So you can instantly feel the cohesiveness once the plugin is engaged, and you can certainly see the detectors at work here and providing that glue. Soft ratio, using makeup gain that I have to add back in, a little bit of soft clipper in here. Let's once again listen to the vocal in the track with the compressor in.
If you had to paint the gutter, which color would you choose? Said the patron to the painter. The painter said the blues. Do you act off intuition or languish and peruse? More like
and again, I'll back off the settings just so you can hear the difference.
If you had to paint the gutter, which color would you choose? Said the patron to the painter. The painter said the blues. Do you act off intuition or languish and peruse? More like tap into tradition from the angle of my mood.
Of all the parameters as we adjust this, where you start to hear the biggest difference is with the hysteresis, because we're not feeling the vocal recovering as quick, which to me gives it a little bit of a lazier feel. Not necessarily wrong, but I feel it just works better if it's just a little more aggressive. Lastly, I want to take a look at the drum loop here. It's a single stereo loop, and let's take a look at how we're using it there. All right, so with the drum loop here, we're looking at the instance here, and we've got a fairly aggressive situation with the plugin here, fast detector, a hair of the peak, fast hysteresis pulled in here, allowing the compressor to recover very quickly. Very minor amount of the slow detector, or slow timing for that detector anyway. So let's bypass this and put it back in halfway through. Very obvious what's happening once we engage the plugin. I've got the threshold set at a point where the detectors are working pretty hard, so it causes a minor amount of pumping, but aggressive in a way that works for the track. Our goal as mixers is to find, even if something sounds great by itself, our goal as mixers is to enhance the intention. And if the intention is to make a drum loop pump a little bit, to add the aggressiveness to the sound, that's what we need to do. And this plugin does it just beautifully. Without artifact, you can drive it pretty hard without it feeling overdone. It's the perfect plugin. Listen again.
You had to paint the gutter, which color would you choose? Said the patron to the...
Bypassed. Too lazy for me. We like the aggressiveness. So with all of that, you've just gotten a really good idea of everything that the AMEK Mastering Compressor can do. I want to thank Colin and Lupe and his camp for allowing the use of these tracks for this demonstration. Much appreciated. And I can be found on Instagram at craigbauermixer.com, easily found on Facebook at Craig Bauer. Thank you, Plugin Alliance, for creating such a beautiful piece of software that we have here, and I'm happy to have done this demonstration. Definitely check it out.